Here we're going to cover a couple more definitions, and these definitions are going to be useful for what we're about to do. So the next video we'll go through some examples where we're going to calculate some of these values, but to do that we've got to actually talk about what this is, right, or the definitions of what we're going to work through, okay? All right, so we're going to go through about 4 or 5 new kind of terms and definitions, okay? And the first one is what we call marginal product, okay? Now, we usually abbreviate this with MP. So whenever you see MP on the homework or somewhere in the book, it means marginal product. So, what the heck is marginal product? Marginal product is the additional output, right? Again, we're thinking about a company and producing stuff, right? It's the additional output, it's the additional quantity produced when we use one more unit of an input. Right? And again, the easiest way to think about this is I hire one more worker, one more person at my company. Marginal product represents how much more we produce, right? So suppose we're making, I don't know, we're making loofahs, and I bring on another employee, and because we hire that employee, we make 20 more loofahs, right? That employee's marginal product is 20 more loofahs, right? And so that's why this term, marginal product, right? Product means output, and marginal means additional, right? And so it basically means the additional output from using another input, that is, hiring another worker, okay? And so that's the way to think about marginal product, all right? Now, that leads us to the law of diminishing returns. Now, this is something you probably already inherently know, you just maybe have not used this term, but this is the idea that the more you use of a resource, the more one uses a resource, the marginal product will begin to decline. Okay? So that is, right, if I'm running a company, I can't just hire people forever, right? And be like, well, I hired one more person and I made more stuff. Let's hire somebody else. Let's hire somebody else, right? We know that as we continue to hire people, the additional output we're going to produce is going to be less and less and less, right? The additional crops farmers try to plant on land, right? If they use more and more fertilizer and so forth, again, the marginal product starts to decline. But the best way to think about the law of diminishing return is to think about studying. Right? So if you're studying for an exam, usually those first couple hours are your really productive hours. You sit down with your notes and you start to go through your notes and you go through some practice problems and so forth. And the impact on your grade on that exam is probably fairly large initially, right? But as the time and hours drag on and it's getting close to midnight or 1 or 2 a.m., the additional impact of studying another hour on your exam grade is probably less and less, right? So we all know that at some point, additional studying will increase your grade less and less, will increase your grade less and less, right? At some point, it's best just to go to bed and get some rest, right? And so that's the idea of diminishing returns, right? The more you use of a resource, the more you do of something, that increase in the overall output is going to start to decline. All right. So this leads us to marginal revenue. Now, marginal revenue, definition-wise, is similar to marginal product. Okay. So marginal revenue we abbreviate with MR. Okay, because we call it Mr. And what marginal revenue means is, at this point you can probably see, marginal means additional, and revenue means, well, revenue, right? So this is the additional revenue from selling one more item, right? So if we're a company, and again, if we're making loofahs, when I sell an additional loofah, that's my marginal revenue, right? Now, usually, if it's a competitive market, then marginal revenue is generally equal to the price, right? And this makes sense. If I sell another loofah for $2, well, my additional revenue is $2, right? So that's what we mean by marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue our company gets when it sells another item or another piece of product, okay? Okay, and this leads us to our fourth definition here, which is what we call marginal revenue product. Now, not surprisingly, we abbreviate this with MRP, okay? Now, the way to think about marginal revenue product is it's kind of the combination of marginal product and marginal revenue, right? So what marginal revenue product means is, okay, I use one more piece of input. That is, I hire another person. That person makes some more stuff. That's called marginal product. I then sell that stuff, right? And when I sell that additional stuff, that's the marginal revenue, right? So marginal revenue product is really looking at what's the additional amount of money my company makes when I hire that additional employee, okay? So marginal revenue product is the additional revenue from using one more input. Now again, I say input here because again, it could be a machine. The easiest way to think about it is in terms of a worker, right? So the example here would be you hire one more worker. That worker produces additional quantity, right? That's the marginal product. And then you sell that quantity. Okay. And so that's the marginal revenue part, right? So the idea with marginal revenue product is how much money does hiring another employee make your company, okay? All right, which leads us to the last definition here, which is what we call value marginal product. So we abbreviate this, again, unsurprisingly, with VMP, okay? This is very similar to marginal revenue product, but in some instances it can be a little different, right? All it is simply is multiplying, it's when, I should say multiplying, it is when, or I should say value marginal product is equal to marginal product times the price, right? That is, you take marginal product and you multiply it by the price when you sell the item. Price when you sell item. Okay. Now, this sounds a lot like marginal revenue product, and it is, especially if the market is very competitive. If the market is very competitive, marginal revenue product and value marginal product are the same, they're equivalent. But if it's another type of market, which again, we're not really going to look at in this course, but if we look at things like monopoly and oligopoly, and in markets where companies have market power, then in that instance, marginal revenue is not really equal to the price anymore, and so this doesn't hold, okay? But in a competitive market, value marginal product and marginal revenue product are the same.